Today we get to review. Today we get to put everything we know about trigonometry together again. Rotations, the degree system, the radian system, as well as the sine, cosine, tangent work from grade 11 and from physics. You might remember the acronym SOHCAHTOA. And today we're going to end up looking at the reciprocal trig ratios, which is an interesting change. So you know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tan is opposite over adjacent. This is normally how we remember it. And there is work on your formula sheet to help you with the trig ratios, so that's always good. Sliding down in many math concepts, we do things one way and then we also do them the other. There are reciprocal trig ratios, which are defined by 1 over sine, 1 over cos, 1 over tan. So these are relationships you're going to have to learn. They're new. So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, and cotangent is the reciprocal of tan. Your formula sheet describes tan, cotan, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. It does not define sine and cosine. So sine and cosine are those base trig ratios that you have to know. We did a lot of work in grade 11 math with rotations and finding trig ratios. So sine is y over r, cosine is x over r, tan is y over x. And now we look for the first time at the reciprocal, which is simply flipping those fractions around. R over y, r over x, and x over y. Why do we do it? Because math can. Hopefully you remember the CAST system. The CAST system seeks to describe what trig ratios are positive in their respective quadrants. In quadrant number 1, everything is positive, cosine being defined by x over r, tan being defined by y over r, y over x, pardon me. Really good review quickly of those trig ratios. So throwing ourselves into quadrant number 2, what happens here? Well, in this area, the x is negative. In this area, both the x and the y are negative. And down in quadrant number 4, only the y is negative. So our trig ratios continue to be the same thing. Y over r, x over r, y over x, opposite over adjacent, y over r, x over r, y over x, and y over r, x over r, and y over x. And because we move into different areas of positive and negative, we see changes in our cosine, sine, and tan values. In quadrant number 1, everything's positive. Positive divided by a positive makes everything positive. That's all. By the time we get into quadrant number 2, my x is negative. So my x is negative, my r is positive, my x is negative, my y is positive. So with my double negatives in quadrant number 3, both x and y being negative, that takes a bite out of sine and cosine to be negative, leaving tan as the only one that's positive. And by the time I get into quadrant number 4, only my y is negative. So anywhere there was a y that's now a negative value, everything else is still positive. And this means that my cosine is positive and everything else is negative. So try out, we have to do some practice with the reciprocal trig ratios. So remember, try to remember those relationships. Sine is related to CSD, cosine is related to SEC, and tan is related to cotan. Now I don't have to remember those because they are on our formula sheet. It does describe on our formula sheet that secant is related to cosine and cosecant is related to sine. Let's try out these cast rule applications. If sine and cosecant, so that's talking about the same thing, they have positive values in both quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. Cosine and secant ratios, that's both talking about the same relationship. That's where C and all are positive, so that's quadrant 1 and quadrant number 4. Tan and cotangent are both positive in quadrant number 1 and quadrant number 3. Now we go through their negatives. Sine and cosecant, remember that's the same thing. They're negative when you go down into quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. Cosine and secant, same relationship. One's the reciprocal of the other. They are negative in quadrant number 2 and 3. And your tan ratios have negative values, so tan and cotan have negative values when you're sitting in quadrants 2 and 4. Let's try some of these ratios out. So I've done a little bit of drawing for these trig ratios. You should have done some work already with radians and degrees and kind of know where things end. Sine 280 ends in quadrant number 4. And I'm just going to have that cast rule up as my relationship determiner cast rule. So when sine's in quadrant number 4, it's negative. When tan's sitting in quadrant number 3, it's positive. When cosine is sitting in quadrant number 3, it's negative. When cosecant, which is related to sine, is sitting in quadrant number 2, it's positive. When cotangent is sitting in quadrant number 4, it's related to tan, it's negative. And when secant, which is related to cosine, is in quadrant number 4, it is positive. My calculator. So pardon me, how does my calculator do this work? Remember, I have to, between being in degree mode or in radian mode, so I'm going to do all the degree ones first. I'm going to find the sine of 280. And I can just type that in. It's negative 0.9848. Sine of 90, maybe that's a value you know from the unit circle. That's 1. Cosecant of 225, cosecant of negative 225. Well, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go 1 divided by sine negative 225. And that's 1.4142. And secant is related to cosine, but it's the reciprocal. 1 divided by cosine of 1,000 is 5.7587. Just checking the absence of a degree measure here. That actually infers that it's radians, which is going to change my answer. Going to fix that up. So that'll be my radian attack. Switch your mode to radian mode. And now the sine of 90, because it didn't have degrees, is 0.8939. Okay, continuing on with my calculator, and now I'll work on the math rounding. In physics, I'm used to just writing the 4 digits. but we've got to round where required. So I'm going backwards across my list. Cosine of 10 pi over 3. I'm in radian mode, and I type that in. Now I'm going to do tan of 7 pi divided by 6. Try not to have quite so many brackets. 7 pi divided by 6. And watching my rounding, 0.5774. So that rounds up. Cotan is 1 over tan, negative 13 pi over 6. So now I have to go 1 divided by tan, negative 13 pi divided by 6, and come out with an answer, negative 1.7321. Negative 1.7321. Now you'll remember reference angles, and we need to do some of that converting again. So every time I think about a rotation, I'm looking for the acute angle, so 7 pi over 4. Where is that in the relationship of the circle? So 7 pi over 4 is almost to the 2 pi mark. I imagined the rotation and then showed you the math that's responsible for it. Common denominator of 4 gives me 8 pi minus 7 pi over 4 to be pi over 4. We did lots of that work already. Remember the steps. Draw in the angle. Draw the angle and create the triangle back to the x-axis. Create the triangle back to the x-axis to find that acute angle. If you're in physics, that's something that you're very familiar with. Now we start trig ratio work that you also did last year. Plotting points, negative 15, comma 8. It has been drawn for me. It means that my triangle, if I draw it in physics notation, is minus 15 on the x and 8 on the y. Calculate the exact length of OP, which is equal to the radius. Remember, that is going to give me Pythagoras as my possibilities for solving. So I've marked the angle. Remember, the angle in standard position starts at the positive x-axis, and now I'm going negative 15 and squaring it, making sure I put it in brackets. Otherwise, my calculator does a pretty poor job. So 225 plus 64 is equal to r squared. And the square root of 289 is a number that you may be familiar with. R is equal to 17. So now I can deal with my trig ratios. Remember, sine, cos, tan. So the sine of the acute angle is opposite, 8 over 17. Cosine of my angle is negative 15 over 17. Tan of my angle is 8 over negative 15. And then I can slide down a little bit and make my paper a little bit longer. Mitchell, I know you can't do that with yours. Sine and cosecant are reciprocal trig ratios. We want to get used to that. So C of theta, simply flip the fraction around. Cosine and secant are reciprocal trig ratios. Flip the fraction around. And tan and cotan are reciprocal trig ratios. Flip the fraction around. That ends this lesson. We're going to try and get at the unit circle this morning. Thank you.